I don't know if Steve touched on it. I know Tommy did, and I consider Tommy a good friend. Look, New Mexico's a very different place, Albuquerque in particular, and we have a ton of different, and this part doesn't make us different, but we have a lot of different cultures, a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different people, places, and things represented here. This place can chew you up and spit you out. I've seen gangsters from LA come back here in the late 80s who were going to take over this town and own this town and these hicks and blah 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 blah. They end up just like perplexed, like what the fuck is this place, man? I got to get the fuck out of here. You guys are crazy. And I've heard that from people on the street when I was doing my thing. I've heard it in jail when I was there, the many times I was there. I've heard it in prison in Albuquerque, not just for the people that are normal that come here that you either love it or you hate it, but for people that think they're going to come here and exploit it. This is a tough land with tough people. And we can fight with each other like the best of them, but like when you come in as an outsider and kind of try and force our hands, I think we bond together really well and say, yeah, we're allowed to fight with each other, but you don't get to come in here and try and push any of us around. And so this is, in a lot of ways, it's like that furthest frontier outpost that a lot of people think they're going to conquer, and they end up making it here on their
Well,
last breath, and they get conquered.
I'm just shocked anyone would think they could conquer it. I mean, New Mexico to me is Indians and outlaws. Like you would only be there if you're hiding in the hills on your way to Mexico.
It's a different place, it's a different, geographically, it's different, culturally, you could take something, and I've learned this in both, my outlaw days and my professional life that I have now. You could take something that is applicable or works or is, prosperous in all 49 other states. I mean, without a doubt, it works. And you can bring it here and it will fall flat on its ass. And conversely, you can take something that doesn't work in those same places and you bring it here and we find out a way to make it work. And it's like, that's just, that's the charm of New Mexico. It's like we're not quite normal in a good way. It really started, a few years before I was even exposed to it, before my direct peer group was, but we were aware of it coming up. And I was a wallflower in some of those places, like when White Zombie came through with Rob Zombie wearing a dress and his band. I think it was Club Rec they played. I can't remember. I think it was there. But like, the punk rock scene here was rich. People write about it. It was talked about in the book Dharma Punks. I mean, this was a major stop on the road for bands that were just crisscrossing the southwest of the country to stop. And I can't say that I was more of a heavy metal guy, thrash guy, but I know enough about punk rock to know that Albuquerque is pretty legendary in that world, and a lot of people wouldn't think that. I know,
No.
I know, I know for a fact that our punk scene and the people that occupied that space were legendary, and it's not in the ways a lot of people would think, because I think a lot of people might have associated it if they're on the outside looking in as, oh, punk rockers, heavy metal dudes are dangerous and stuff. I was always told that they were some of the most accommodating, kind people. Crash on the floor, we'll feed you. You got no gas money, we'll raise gas money to get you to your next town. That kind of thing. From my perspective, and the people that I've talked to, Albuquerque had a stellar reputation as being just like, yeah, you may not think this, but you need to go play Albuquerque.
That was the history that I remembered.
Albuquerque just had some great bands too, like just my favorite local band back in the day was Big Damn Crazy Weight, with Brian Banks and Jason Ward. Obviously before that, you had Jerry's Kids with Gordy, and Cracks in the Sidewalk with Chris, who was the youngest member of that band. Just the All You Can Eat, and those guys lived in front of me and Darren for a long time, and my band would play shows with them, and just there was a sense of camaraderie with each other. And when you're young, you always have a little bit of competitive something in you to where you kind of want to be better. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, and when you get down to brass tacks, it's like everybody, we all partied together. We all just wanted to like live our life, be kind of happy, not be bothered, listen to music, get high,
Play music.
play music. Oh, most definitely. Play music, listen to music, support music. Our generation too was when the downtown scene really became the downtown scene, with Jerry and Mike and Beyond Ordinary becoming what it became. And then, the Dingo Bar, Time Out, which is now obviously the launch pad. Like, there were some epic shows that happened in those places. And it was really, this whole group of people that we're talking about that probably celebrated anywhere between 1 and 5 first birthdays down there, with all the fake IDs and stuff. Like we supported that scene, and it was like we embraced it, like
Nowhere
just so
else.
much. Like, oh yeah, like, and I know
Nowhere
everybody's like,
else.
oh yeah, you don't know LA, you don't New York. Like I get it, but we are way more insular than that. Like we are all we have. Like New York's millions of people, LA's millions of people. You have, 5 or 10 different places you could go to back then and do something. Here it was really limited, and we were in each other's vicinity a lot. And so like when we supported, like, we supported, and that's just what we did.
We supported. That's
Yeah,
it's kind of what we do. We bring it.
right, right.
What about the skateboarding? Could you watch all that happen too?
I did, but like as a kid, I never, even I guess even as an adult, I never really grouped up with people in that. So one of the apartments we lived in was behind Del Norte High School, and the first, to my recollection, maybe there was one somewhere else, and I think you were talking with somebody while they were driving, and he was trying to figure it out. It was Blue Sky Skateboard Park at San Mateo and McLeod, which like that was just a badass skate park. I mean, and that was a world-class skate park at the time, and we're talking like 79, 80, into the early 80s. Like it had a big half pipe. It had a giant bowl with the snake entrance. It had the smaller bowl. It was, and on the backside of that, it had this killer BMX track, and they sold, the Dogtown boards and the cryptos and the indie trucks and all that stuff. And so I would go over. There's this little kid who had no supervision, and I would watch. And then I remember buying my first Bob Biniak deck over there. I remember, there was a trailer and there was a fence that went right into the trailer, and you walk into this door and you go through the trailer. When you come out the other door, you're in the skateboard park, right? And so I would go there and just do my little thing while my mom was bartending all day, and or
Yeah.
come back later with my bike and ride the BMX track. And that was their, I think they, for Albuquerque, I think that might have been just a little ahead of its time, not in terms of like not being supported, but like I'm sure their liability insurance was through the roof, and people are still skating ditches like they do now a lot, which obviously we have world renowned ditch skating here. But yeah, I remember that when it was built, I would watch it being built. If my memory serves me, I think I have my timeline right, and I think I described the skateboard park right, but that place was epic. And there might have been, because my world at the time, like, so you have to remember, I'm in fourth and fifth grade at that time that I'm
Say
that I'm
where we
referring
can
to,
walk
fourth
to.
and sixth. Yeah, it was the closest thing. So I was kind of over there in that apartment area. So there very well might have been one down here, and it kind of sounds familiar, but that was just the easiest one for me to hang out at all
Yeah.
day, because I could walk to it or bike to it like pretty easily.
Well, and the theory was that there were several, but then the city couldn't afford the insurance and tore them all out and left them just in piles for you kids to look at. Like, this is where you used to play.
Yeah, look at it, suffer, you little shit.
Yeah.
Fucking
And
here's some mental anguish for you. Now go fucking rob something.
well, isn't I remember our generation not having much to do. That was the whole problem.
That was a blessing and a curse, right? We didn't have much to do, so we made things to do.
Yes.
When I was younger, kind of going back into that time period at my dad's house, probably like 12, 12, 13, 14, 15, up until like my first year, maybe 2 years of driving, when I was working that construction job in the summers because I was in school. I met this guy that was probably 10 years older than me. His name was Jason Frazier, and just a super sweetheart of a guy, hardcore alcoholic, just hardcore, but harmless. And so when my dad would pass out at night, like I would sneak out the window and I would run through, that area of Copper going all the way to Wyoming. And that's back when Fox's Booze and Cruise used to be there,
My God.
and the front liquor store, the Peaches family owned it. They also owned the Blue Spruce. And so I would run those streets just like crazy. I would get to know, as a little kid, I would know some of the prostitutes. You'd see all the older gay guys cruising the back street looking for dates. But the reason I was there is I was navigating my way across Central to the other side of Zuni on Virginia, where my friend Jason Frazier lived, that I worked construction with. And I would go to his house and probably get there anywhere between 8 and 10 o'clock. And we would just smoke a ton of weed, drink a lot of beer. He would turn me on to cocaine, and he would introduce me to like just all the music. Like fucking, he was a Beatles freak. So he broke down every Beatles album, every Led Zeppelin album, all the folk albums, all the Black Sabbath, all everything. And this guy he just loved And so I hung out with him as much as I could late at night because I had no one else to hang out with unless Joe and Ted were with me. And then we would all go to his house and party.
Yeah, that was be the
Yeah,
next
because he was
guess.
older and it was cool, but we would just hang out in his apartment and just fucking listen to rock and roll. And then, he'd introduce us to like Leon Redbone and Townes Van Zandt and, Deep Purple and Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and all this stuff that the heavy metal that I had already been exposed to. But then it was like a musical history lesson as well. And
Good man.
yeah, yeah, he was doing the Lord's work. Unfortunately, he died at a really, really young age from alcoholism. And the last time I saw him was I was in jail one of the last times before I went to prison, and he had gotten a DUI. And he was just such a kind person, like just a harmless drunk, but he would get wasted, and his liver was failing, and you could see just all blotchy. And he was like, "Oh, hey." Ironically enough, he ended up drinking at my aunt's bar that she opened up in the Heights, when I was in my early teens, and he lived down the street, and I walked in there one day and he was there, and that's what he would do towards the end is he would just go to the closest bar to him and drink there. And when I walked in, I was like, holy shit, Jason, is that you? He's like, yeah, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, my aunt owns this bar. And so Jason, although a severe alcoholic, he was just a sweetheart of a person and did so much good by just like turning me on to so much history about the music that we listened to. And I really appreciate him for that.
I like that part of the story too, because you were running around the war zone in the middle of the night trying to sneak around to go visit someone who would give you a music history lesson.
It was so fun. I mean, there were street level sex workers that would recognize me. Like, what are you doing out here, honey? You better stay safe. And where are you going? I mean, I only had really one time that I got really, really scared, and that's when I was there was a trailer park between Central and Zuni, and this one guy was really friendly, and for some reason I'm thinking I didn't have any drugs, or maybe Jason wasn't home that night. And he's like, "Hey, you want to get high?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Let's go to my house or my trailer," and we went in there, and I remember the mood changed. And I was probably like, I don't know, 11 or 12. The mood changed. And he went back into his room. And I just felt like the darkest. I'm just like, something's not right here. And I went to leave the trailer and he had locked the doors. And I unlocked him and I just ran out and he started screaming and running after me. But I ran towards Central where there was a lot of people and he stopped. And
Wow.
I think that could have ended up really bad for me.
What a just the neighborhood itself is not a safe place for children.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a wake up call. And also some of like the old school Albuquerque gangs like were in that neighborhood, and that was the VLH, the Varios Los Hermanos, and I remember seeing the tags for the VHHG, which was Varios Happy Homes Grande. So those, this is like before Bloods and Crips and Sureños kind of, came into play, but like there were old school neighborhood gangs, Brewtown, and there was obviously the Los Padillas and stuff. But like in my neighborhood, that's what was primarily there. So got to know some of those people as a little kid. Every once in a while you might get in a little fight with one of them. And back then it wasn't they weren't looking to like maim you. It's just like, yeah, it's your neighborhood. You gotta fight a little bit, bro. You gotta fight a little bit. We gotta tax you a little bit. And sometimes, an older kid would just kick your ass and you just have to take it.
Even as a girl, we got that in Albuquerque. Just
Right.
had to like take it. Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. I remember one of my dad's friends, Vance, he was dating or maybe married to this lady whose son was like in one of the Hispanic gangs. And my dad would just say, oh, the kids are going to babysit you, on Friday night. The adults are going out, my dad, Vance. And it would be me and this gangster kid with all his friends. And my
Oh
dad would drop me
no.
off on
Oh,
Friday. And like he wouldn't come get me till like Sunday night. He would tell me I'll be back later tonight, but he wouldn't come get me till Sunday. And nothing bad happened. It was just
no, but
these kids were just fucking partying hard and they
oh my
like, just
gosh.
like fucking smoking weed and drinking booze. And that's back when like angel dust was kind of prevalent a little bit. And I'd see
Wow.
that shit. And they weren't trying to hurt me. They're just like, yeah, we're gonna
No, that
babysit
was,
you, but we're not stopping doing what we're doing. And so I was like, all right, cool, let's smoke weed then.
and this is how old?
For that was like 10, 11,
Oh,
maybe 12. I mean, there were times when I was left on my own, like as early as 6. Like my dad would be like, I'm going to the store to get some groceries, and he wouldn't come home, and I'd get a call in the middle of the night from his friends like, hey, you need to get in a cab and come downtown. Dad got a DUI. So I mean, I was taking cabs when I was young. I knew how to do all that shit. Yeah, I think even though some of us might not have, hung around with each other at a certain time in our life, like just you cross paths and that's what you do. I definitely would not consider myself, back in those days, part of the punk rock scene. Was I punk rock adjacent? Probably, because I was a little fucking hesher, but we all knew each other by face at least, if not by name. And then as you get older, guys like Tommy and Steve, Tommy and I connected more probably a little later in life due to some similar life circumstances. And then, Steve's obviously a staple in the scene, and I see him around doing good things, working with kids and corrupting the little minds of our culture, which is a good thing. And so, we know who we all
Absolutely.
are. There were times like, so my cousins whose parents were pretty wealthy, whose mom was pretty wealthy, she kicked them out of their house because she was, I don't know, that's just who she was. She was an unhappy person. And they came down here from Connecticut. One ran with the Hells Angels and one was just an extreme partier. And my brother and sister were so much older than me that they were out of the house when I was young. So when I was with my dad, my two cousins, Dawn and Debbie, they were like sisters to me, and I went with them everywhere. And Dawn was the older one, and she back then you could write to inmates in different prisons in the back of like magazines, like it could be Lowrider magazine or it could be Easy Rider magazine or whatever the case was, and you could create prison pen pals, right? Well, she ends up getting a pen pal with this guy. I think he was in Chino prison for like 20 years. And Jesus Christ, he was a fucking, if you were to like say, draw me a picture of what you think a Viking would look like, in modern day and age, that was this guy. He was like literally 6'10", 7 feet tall, about 350 pounds, like just a prison build, ripped, straight, blonde hair, like down to his waist. And then one day, when I'm like 12 or 13, he shows up and they're married. And she's like, yeah, this is my husband. And his name was Steve Cox, and he's like, "What's up, little brother?
No,
How you
no,
doing? How you doing?" He was nice to me in the beginning, and to me, that wasn't like I
no,
wasn't like
no,
mortified. I was like, "Oh,
no.
that's life." And showing up and having 20 bikers in the front yard for like 4 days at a
That's what
time,
happens.
and everybody, yeah. So he's the one that gave me my first tattoo.
Yeah, those guys are good. It's when you bring all of them to your house now, you're
Yeah,
like, this is not good for kids.
he got a little sideways later on down the road, and I think he took off and got violated or something. But that's the house where I tried to have like a senior party, and it mortified everybody who showed up except everybody who knew me. So it became
What
an
is
adult party.
what is with that neighborhood? Just that's where low income housing is. That's where all the
Yeah, I
single
mean,
moms lived.
yes, like, people, who might be going through financial hardship. I think a lot of people who might have not have been naturalized citizens, it's kind of like it's not bad. I mean, every neighborhood, every part of town has bad people. Some can just hide it better than others. It's just a place, for the most part, it's hardworking people that might be dealing. Back then it was like, if you didn't have a high school diploma or a GED, it's hard to get a job. And so like, people just doing what they needed to do to survive. And that was a place where they lived because it was just a shit ton of apartments all crammed into one, quadrant, and rents were usually pretty low. And everybody's philosophy back then was just kind of like, what you see here, let it stay here, and fucking keep your nose out of everybody's business but your own. Don't pay attention to the gunshots or the screams next door. Just shut the fuck up and mind your business. And, people that adhere to that lifestyle, they're just like, yeah, it's not bad.
It's not bad. It's better
It's
on
where we
some
live.
streets than others.
Yeah, for
It's
sure,
like
for sure.
a couple streets over that it's
Yeah.
no good.
I used to walk. So the park just to the east where my dad lived, La Mesa Park, it actually used to be the Tasuki Drive-In way back in the 60s.
Wow.
And it was square in the middle of a residential neighborhood area. So back in the 70s, there was a big vacant lot behind my dad's place. And so I could sit on the back fence at night. I could watch the movies. I couldn't hear them because they had the speakers that you had to put on your car window. But I would just sit back there and just watch 70s movies. And then eventually they tore that down, and for several years it was a vacant movie lot with no screens or anything. But I don't know if you remember this. Back then, like, to watch the movies, they'd have a little berm to where you could kind of pull your car up and it kind of face up a little bit
Hmm.
so you could see
Hmm.
the theater. So it had those, right? And so I remember when I was really young, I had gotten this little mini bike, and you could just ride it like just jumping things, and people would be there with their bikes, and it was just a big dirt lot with no fencing, and there were no buildings or anything like that, but it was like that for a few years. And so it became this like fucking industrial playground for a lot of the kids in the neighborhood until they started turning it into the park and where the community center is and stuff. So that was just like the natural progression of the neighborhood. And making lemonade out of lemons. That's what we did, right?
I didn't know any different. I liked it just fine. But you always knew that the bikers lived across the street or something.
Right,
My
right. Yeah.
Yeah, my grandma was incredibly well protected in the neighborhood. She always
Look,
thought it
if
was
you're a
great.
if you're a staple in the neighborhood, if you're someone that's been there a while and
Mm,
you're known as a solid person, like your neighborhood's got your back. That's kind of the way it worked,
mhm,
right? Like you may
mhm.
not like some of the things that we do, but you're a part of the neighborhood and we're not going to let
Yes,
nothing happen to you,
yes.
right? Right? Like as long as you're not a snitch, long as you're not getting into people's business, as long as you're not a cop caller,
Hmm.
you're golden.
Yeah, and she was Mary Smith too, so
Perfect name. It
perfect.
would almost be like witness protection name, Mary Smith. Okay, Mary,
Little old lady lived there till
I'm
like
John Smith. Nice to
2002.
meet you.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked it back then. What middle school did you go to?
The only one in Albuquerque that I went to was Hayes Middle School
Hmm.
over off of Pennsylvania and just a little bit east of Pennsylvania, a little bit north of Lomas. But most of my middle school years were just fucking all over the place in central Arizona.
Yeah, mom was going back and forth.
Yeah, for a long time, the custody thing was when my parents got divorced when I was like 3. School year with mom, summers with dad, and then sometimes, if mom was busy partying or getting into a new marriage, I'd stay part of the school year with my dad and then go back with my mom. I'd go back on like Christmas, and then my dad would be like, "Well, you keep him for a while." So, like I said, and I'd go to 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 schools a year.
Damn.
Just so the one middle school that I went to here was Hayes Middle School. I think I did that for a year or maybe a year and a half. And then I went back to Arizona and just fucking all over Central Arizona. Like I can't even remember them. I was just thinking the other day though. I went to middle school. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember it's when Blizzard of Oz came out with Randy Rhoads and Ozzy Osbourne. I remember that distinctly. It was the first, I believe it was the first lung transplant kid in the country, David Mendoza. I was looking that up the other day. I'm like, shit, I distinctly remember him. It was all over the news. And I remember him getting on the bus for the first time after his surgery with like his surgical mask so he wouldn't get infection and stuff like that. So I remember going to the same school that he did. And I was like, oh, yeah, I totally forgot about that.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Just one of those little memories.
Yeah. It's too bad that she drug you all over. Did you go live with your dad in high school? Is that what happened?
Originally, my dad graduated from Highland in 1960, and for some reason, when I was little, I think it's because I found his high school yearbook and I looked through it, and I always thought, well, I'm in the Highland district with my dad living here. For some reason, I always wanted to go to the same high school as my dad, and I was going to this high school in Central Phoenix called Washington High School. And during my freshman year, I think my mom really saw like the future in me, and she's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to contain this at all. And so she basically told me, I can't afford you. And so you're going to have to go live with your dad. And
Oh,
true or not, there's probably some truth to it. But she sent me back here. And, Joe and Ted were like, fuck yeah, dude, we're already at Highland and fucking let's go.
yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, let's go. And so, that's when I started Highland. And I just stayed there. Like I didn't see my mom like on any meaningful level unless she came to a family gathering for many years. Like she was out doing her thing.
Stayed with your dad in high school. The accident that you had your senior year was really hard on him, wasn't it?
Yeah, my dad's family is from the very, very deep South, right? And incredibly racist, and incredibly conservative. And for some reason, that's not how my dad lived his life. My dad was very much more of a liberal, like, hey, if you're good enough to party with, you're good enough to fucking coexist with. That was kind of like my dad's philosophy, right? It's just like, I got no judgment because that's just who I am. And his father was very, very much like if he did anything for you, it was something that he could weaponize against you later, right? And he would criticize my dad for having a black girlfriend or tell me if I help you buy a car and you have a black person in there, I'm going to take the car from you. And I was just like, God, what an asshole. And they weren't happy people. And so when my accident happened, it was a great excuse for that side of the family to say, look what you've done. You're the reason your
Oh
father's an
no.
you're the
Oh
reason your
no.
father. And that's just how they operated. But I knew it already, right? Like my dad had been an alcoholic his whole life, but everybody just they wanted to try and find something to pin it on, right? And so Don and Debbie's mom back in Connecticut was, she told my dad to throw me out when I was 14. She's like, I would make him leave if I were you because I was getting into a little bit of trouble, nothing major. She's the type of person that you would write a letter to when you're like 8 or 9 and she would send it back to you corrected and redlined. Like, what an asshole. I mean,
Yeah,
and
that's too bad.
it is what it is, but I'm like, Jesus Christ, I'm fucking 8. Like, I don't need a fucking English lesson on my fucking crayon drawing. But yeah, so it was very persecutory type relationship. I think my dad was just as shocked as I was, and I think his alcoholism was so bad. Like my dad didn't really know how to be a parent in a functional way, and so his way to cope with everything was to drink. And so, again, we don't talk about stuff. And when we do, he learned that from his family. When we do, it's an explosion of rage or judgment or persecutory behavior or anything like that. And so it didn't surprise me that they came off to me that way. But I think it really took its toll on my dad because I think at that point my dad might have been experiencing like maybe I have a part to play in this. Never talked with him about this, but maybe he was starting to realize like, oh, maybe I could have been there a little more. And maybe not.
Right.
Maybe he was just like, fuck all this, I'm getting drunk, but I have a feeling, right? And so it really drove a wedge into the family. I'm not going to say family dynamic because there really was no dynamic. It was just like the family dysfunction.
Just gave
And for
them an
me, it was,
excuse.
yeah. And for me, it was just a further excuse to like separate and just go balls to the wall on what I was doing. So, yeah.
How much longer did your dad live? Like, when did
My
your dad
dad
pass away?
died. My dad died while I was in prison. He died at 60 years old, and there was a lot of concern. When he worked for Sandia, and he fucking hated it. And I would just like get a different fucking job. It's like he was so miserable working there that he started when he was 19 and retired when he was 55. And I remember having some conversations with people that were like, dude, we're so worried about your dad that when he retires that he's just going to drink and drink and drink all day. And that's literally what he did. I was out doing my own thing, but I would sporadically have interactions with him where he would wake up, fucking bide his time and get to the bar by, 10:30, 11 and probably stay there till 4 and then go home, pass out, wake up and then just drink till he passed out again. And that's what he did for the last 5 years of his life after retirement. And he didn't resemble the person I knew when he died. I got a picture of him. I was dating a girl, and when I went to prison, I said, "Go see my dad," and she did, and she took a picture of him. And when she sent it to me, I was like, "Oh my God, he's going to die soon." He just had a really big. My dad was like 5'10", about 170 pounds most of my life, and his liver was distended out to here, and his face was
Really?
red and blotchy, and gin blossoms all over his
Really?
nose. And he just at 59, 58 years old, he just looked like he was 75 and just unhealthy and smoked and just a very lonely life. My dad led a very, very lonely life. And that's the one thing that like I feel so bad for him because he had the opportunity, whether it was relationships or whatever, but I think he understood that he was an alcoholic and he didn't want to quit. And so there's no use in getting married again because no one's going to put up with this unless it's another dysfunctional person. And there's only room for one of us on this boat. And so he just kind of was like this, lived in the same place, but just this emotional drifter. And, the way I like to describe it is he would drink in these dives, just dive bars. And I think maybe it made him feel a little bit like a king among cockroaches. Like
Oh,
at least I'm,
goodness.
at least I'm not as
Really?
bad as these people, even though he was pretty fucking bad. And so that was, I think, the last years of his life were probably very lonely, and he died in a very, very lonely way. He died alone. They found him in his bathroom, and the only way they knew to go look for him is because he didn't show up to the bar for 2 days in a row.
Oh, no. And
That's
then,
the only, yeah. And so they called somebody and they went and found him. He had died of complications due to, I'm sure it was, cirrhosis and hypertension and all the stuff that comes with alcoholism. And so that's the way they found him. And then that's how he died. And I feel really bad about that because I saw glimpses of my father, who he was. And he was just this, like I was as a kid, he was a deeply caring, quiet, passionate, very different from his father type of person. And I just saw over my life, I might have seen 30 minutes of that with him, maybe 30 total minutes,
and
maybe
that whole
a minute,
time.
and that whole time. But I knew that's who he was at his core, just a very giving, kind person. So I saw a tiny bit of vulnerability, like a couple times over maybe 20 or 30 years, but he must have lived a very tortured existence. And then come to find out later on, my dad had a very, very, very difficult tour of duty in Vietnam involving a lot of death and a lot of trauma and a lot of PTSD. And I didn't realize most of this until after he had passed because he refused to talk about it when he was alive. And he didn't acknowledge that. And so it made a little more sense later on. My family was not the type that was like, like I said, we don't get help. We don't see therapists. We just fucking suck it up and rub some dirt on it and move on. Just like my mother. My mother was a two-time teenage mother and struggled a lot. I don't think I ever recall her seeking any type of government assistance or case management or back then food stamps or, housing vouchers or whatever. It's just like, no, we don't acknowledge that. It's, on the outside, everything needs to look okay. We don't acknowledge all the turmoil and dysfunction and trauma and PTSD and abuse on the inside. We need to make the outside look okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you left
A lot
home.
of,
Yeah, that's wow, it's a lot. They managed to escape your dad's family in Tennessee. You think that was also abusive or just
I do.
verbally and your mom?
Yeah, so when you look back, I realized something too, right? Like I used to think like, why is my dad's dad just such a fucking asshole? Why does he think he can buy everybody? And why does he think that if he does something for you, that he can weaponize it against you later on? Well, I comes to find out that my dad's dad, which would be my great grandfather, died in a railroad accident when my dad's dad was only 9 years old. So, in the early part of the 19th century, my father's father grew up without a father figure. So my guess is he probably just did what he thought was right, passed that dysfunction on down to my dad. My dad kind of rebelled against it, the conservative racist part, but the other coping part, he adapted that into his own dysfunctional coping mechanisms, and then I pulled some of that into my life. So when I dug deeper further back, like there's no excuse for my, grandfather being such a massive racist or anything like that, but I understand some of the dysfunction because if you go back, you see the lack of, appropriate parenting due to death and due to like someone being given a lesson by an uneducated person and they go spewing that, throughout their life, and it's just misinformation taught by an uneducated person. So I think that spilled down over several generations.
Wow. It's almost as if it's bad enough to have a dysfunctional childhood, but it's almost even worse to have no role model, to just have to like make it up yourself because I don't know, men tend to be pretty aggressive, kind of
Yeah,
animalistic. When they make it up themselves, it's like
I
kind of
think
intense.
you know when I started looking at some things in my life, later on when I realized like, okay, I might need to do something about this addiction on a serious note. Like you start looking back and everybody be like, well, what would you consider your first drug of choice or your first drug of abuse? And I always used to think it was alcohol because of what I told you. And then, I would think a little harder, and I think sugar played a role in it because it affects your brain and lights up the same part as your brain as cocaine. But the real first drug of choice for me was daydreaming when I was a kid because there was nobody around. And so I would live in this fantasy world of like, I grew up just outside of Albuquerque when I was really little. That's where one of my mom's husbands took us in the country of Estancia. And I would literally, at 5, 6 years old, I would walk out of the trailer and go sit in a field. My brother and his friends dug this giant fucking hole, and I'm shocked to this day how it never caved in on anybody and buried them alive. But it was, probably 20 feet across, 10 feet deep, and it just was covered with plywood. And they had built some steps going down. And I remember when they were gone or partying or in school, sometimes I would go out there and go into that and think I was being sneaky and look at all the weed and the beer cans. But it was in the middle of this field, and I would sit there and I could look around to some of the country houses and I would just imagine like, wow, I wonder, because to me, if they lived in that house and I saw them together as a family, I thought they were normal, right? Regardless of what happened, I didn't know, but I was just like, I wonder what it's like to be a part of that family. I wonder what it'd be like to be there on a Christmas morning and have everybody there and have someone there all day or have a person to hang out with instead of like me at a young age, like getting on a mini bike and riding for hours all by myself and just fucking miles away from home from like literally 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, just like totally unsupervised, doing things that I don't know how I didn't get killed at a rock quarry or in a fucking cave in or on a dirt road wrecking somehow or just fucking getting kidnapped in the fucking van by the guy who has a fucking cute puppy and some candy. And so on from there, I think it went into sugar because I just became this little sugar addict. Obviously still sipping on drinks because everybody think it's cute, but we were also alive, when 2 liter bottles were introduced. Remember the 2 liter bottles of Coke when they came out? I thought those were single servings. I thought that was like a
Everybody's,
bottle of Coke.
it took a decade for people to figure out that that was not a good idea.
Yeah, and I would go stay with my grandparents, my mom's mother and her husband, which I loved. And I remember they bought one time, and I was in the kitchen, and they came in, and I was drinking it, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm having a Coke." They're like, "That's." I was treating it like it was a can of Coke, right? And they're like,
Yeah.
"That's don't drink out of the bottle." I'm like, "Why not?" They're like, "That's not one serving." And so I would just like, mow sugar down and just like fantasize and daydream and, very seldom be super present in my body. I would always be, even at a young age, like I said, I'd be on this like little mini bike that my dad bought me when I was like fucking 5 or 6 because he grew up on them. And, I'd just be riding around or, exploring the countryside and just looking for shit to do outside of myself, right? Because that's what we did.
Is that not healthy? Is that a form of escapism?
I think for me at a young age, I mean, I think part of it was just being a natural little explorer, and I think part of it's very normal. But I think a lot of it for me was just trying to find something or somebody to identify with. I don't feel like, even as a young kid, I never felt like I truly identified with a group of people. I would have a friend or maybe two friends. But I think looking back, that's because I always thought that like you got to be careful because these are going to go away because we're going to move again or they're going to leave or something's going to happen. So you either over identify with one or two people and you really like lean into them because, oh, these are my best friends, but I can't do it with too many because I know we're going to move soon. And then you move and you lose contact with those friends and you have to make the new best friends, and then you move and you lose contact with them. So you were all, at a very young age, I was careful about how close I got to people. It was more like when I was with my mom, it's like, who's going to be dad this year, right? Who's going to be the guy this year? Is it going to be the really cool guy who makes me laugh and really tries to appeal to the kid to get in with the mom? Or is it going to be this guy that she's been dating that's super abusive and that I have to fucking run in the bedroom when he's fucking hitting her to try and stop it? Like, so there's all this weird shit in play, right? All this weird shit. And then you're looking for a functional father because my alcoholic father was just like, there'd be times where he'd be like, "I'm going to come get you from your mom's," and he'd never show up. And then they would fight. And it's just, oh my God, it was just so much chaos. And as a kid, I'm just like, how do I keep the peace? And how do I just try and get needs met as a kid, right? And a lot of that is done by staying out of people's way because you think you're the cause of a lot of stuff. And so you just start making up scenarios in your head and you turn to the things that accept you. And as you grow older, what accepted me was running wild in the neighborhood and having kids that were just like me be my friend group, like having our own fucking sick sense of humor with each other. And Ted's a good example. Both his dad and my dad thought it was better for us to be driving them home from the bars when we were like 10 or 11 than it would be for them to drive and get a DUI. So we're driving our parents home, and sometimes both of them, like when we're 10, 11, 12 years old, hiked over. He's like, because it's better for you to get a ticket for that than for me to get a DUI. So I kept driving my dad home from the bar for years before I ever had a license.
I thought that was my role. It
I was
taught
a
you to
bartender when I
drive.
was 6.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
my
taught
dad's
you to
friends would come over
drive.
on the weekends.
Yeah,
I
it's
knew
our
like my
job to
dad
drive
drank
them around.
my dad drank QT water or QT whiskey and water, and so I knew how to make his drinks and his friends' drinks, and I was the beer fetcher, and I was the fucking kid that would walk out when someone walked outside to smoke weed, and they thought that like I didn't know what it was, but I already knew what it was, and they're, "What are you doing?" "Oh, just having a cigarette." And I'm just like in my head, I'm like, "You're smoking weed. You don't need to lie to me. I already know what the shit is, bro." You know? And so that's just when that becomes your norm, that's how you build your reality is around that kind of stuff.
So then when you moved out, was it still driven by, oh, this is all you know? These are the only role models you have? Or then it's just addiction? Then it's just full on you on a mission.
Man, it was a party. Fuck, I really saw it as a party. And when I moved out, right, the day I turned 17, I moved out. The day I turned 17.
You
And I
got a
didn't tell my
car, got a
I had a car
car.
and I didn't tell my dad I was leaving. I didn't tell him. I just moved out. He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You're not 18." I'm like, and he didn't put up a fight. He's like, "Okay." And I think in his brain, he's like, "Okay, let him go do it. Now I can go do what I want to do." And so we'd go work construction, and maybe every couple of weekends we'd come in back to Albuquerque, and we'd either go to bars to where we knew people that worked there, and we'd go fucking get drunk at certain bars, or party with older people, and we thought we were all mature and this and that, and going to rock concerts and doing blow and smoking crack, and for a while it was a party, and then when I was 18, it was an issue, right? And so I went to my first rehab, charter behavioral health for crack when I was 18, and at that
Wow. that
Yeah,
fast. Why
yeah,
were
yeah.
you working out of town still in high school?
The type of construction that it was over the
Mm,
summers, it
mm.
was just, you had to be in remote places. It
Oh,
was,
I time.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And as soon as I moved out and graduated, then it was full time. But you'd go and you'd come back and you fucking all we could do out of town is like if you have the drugs you take or you come in and get. But when you're here and then you have, because we were making good money as kids back then,
that's
10, 12 bucks an hour
yeah.
cash back then. It's like
Construction
holy
work.
shit,
Yeah,
we're
you guys.
rich.
That's well, it's a lot of money that probably went straight to drugs.
100%. Pay
Enough.
bills and everything that's left you spend on Coke and beer and partying and this and that and all that, right? And then, next thing you know, you're just realizing, holy shit, this could be a little problem. And cognitively, guys usually aren't fully cognitively developed until they're 25 or near 25. And so at 18, when I go into treatment for crack, I'm just thinking like, okay, as long as I stay away from crack, I'm going to be fine. I'm just going to smoke super high grade weed. I'm just going to drink booze and I'll probably just snort Coke and maybe do a little bit of speed and just some pills and that's all I'll do. It's like the crack is the problem. I mean, we don't think of it in terms of addiction, and so you learn right away that like, oh, okay, you get out and all your friends are like smoking crack, and you're like telling them, no, dude, I don't smoke crack anymore, and they're like, great, dude,
Yeah.
we're so glad to hear it. We're gonna go ahead and smoke crack in front of you, and it's not that it's their fault, but that's just how we do it when we're teenagers, right? And so you fall back into it. And then, as we talked about, it progresses into the deeper and darker stuff, and you find yourself crossing every line you said you'd never cross, and then fucking making a new line, and then crossing that, and you think you've hit a new low, and then all of a sudden you realize you just drove a Mack truck under that low, and you got the next new low, and you're like, oh, this is the lowest as it can be, and then 3 months later you're like, holy shit, I thought that was the lowest I can be. I can look up and barely see that low, and now I'm even lower than that. You know what I mean?
And at this point, you're still partly sober. You're not that wasted. The drugs haven't gotten that bad. It's still just crack and alcohol. I'm teasing you, obviously. I'm
Right,
just
right.
like, because
Right.
I,
Yeah. We justify, like I said, those mental gymnastics. We can make those work for us for a while. And, as long as, I wasn't homeless because I had a couch to sleep on and I had a car and I wasn't as bad as that guy because I could feed myself. And then, you lose the car. You're like, well, I still have a place and my car is wrecked because I wrecked it when I was wasted and I nodded out at the steering wheel and rear-ended another car and caused great injury to that person, was able to run away from that
damn,
accident. But at least I'm not
damn.
homeless like that guy doing that stuff. And then when you are like that guy, you're like, well, at least I can hustle. And, I'm not like that dude, over there in the alley just totally passed out who can't even hustle. And then when you're that guy, you're just like, well, at least I'm not in jail or I'm not fucking getting caught. And then when you get caught, you're like, the mental gymnastics. We get a 10 for doing that for a
That's
while.
a lot.
Right.
And that's still just with crack. That's just their first summer out of high school, Jeff.
That was yeah, that was I wasn't like that on crack. What I did is on crack I was, me and Darren were living together and I had a girlfriend, Stephanie, that I was with, and I was selling a lot of coke, but I was smoking a lot of crack. And so I think, lived with my girlfriend and we'd bounce around and she was in college and everything was a party and I stopped crack and we tried to make it work a little longer, but we're kids partying and that doesn't work. Maybe move back home for a minute and then kind of settle in, get another job, save up some money. And I got a sales job when I got out of treatment. And it's funny, my friend took me there because he was applying and I ended up getting the job and he didn't. And I ended up doing really, really good. It was part-time telemarketing, but I just happened to be really fucking good at it. And
Sure.
so I was making, I don't know, let's see, this was 89 and I was making like almost $30,000 a year part-time as a salesman, which is fucking crazy money. So they would always be like, you should work full time. I'm like, hell no, I'm working part time because I can party my ass off. And so, they would pay you bonuses on the spot if you hit a sales goal. Like right then and there, they'd come write you a check. Boom, 150, 200, 500, 1,000 bucks. And I'd get off and me and Darren would go meet up and we'd fucking, get wasted and head downtown and go party and, come back and smoke crack all night and pass out and then wake up 3 or 4 hours later, go to work and repeat that cycle for about 4 or 5 years.
Wow. That's rather
Yeah,
intense.
it was pretty intense. It was, there was a period where, like I said, it was all good until it was all bad. And, it went from like we were the people you wanted to party with. And if we had a party, you want to be there. There's definitely going to be drugs and people and beer. And then all of a sudden, we were the people that were like, if you're having a party, do not invite those guys. If you see them coming, kill the lights, shut the blinds, lock the door, don't say a fucking word. Do not let those dudes in because shit will go missing or something bad will happen, you know? And it just seemed like that happened overnight. And I think about that a lot. And I'm just like, God damn, man, it was all good until all of a sudden it was all bad. And it seemed like there wasn't a transition. It seemed like it just happened in my mind.
The heroin
Yeah,
just
that's
changed
definitely
the
when heroin.
vibe.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I was living down off of Five Points, and I had a really good place, and I'd quit that really good job that I had, and I was getting all the weed from the cartel and all the coke from the other dude from the cartel and all the heroin. And what had happened, I was, I'd sell a bunch of weed, and then I'd buy a bunch of coke, and then I would, do a bunch of coke, and then I'd use that money to pay that guy, and use that money to pay that guy, and then that lasted for like a year, and I was selling and doing a lot of drugs. And then one day, I think I was telling you this, one day I went to meet up with one of them. I can't remember. It was probably the weed guy. And he was actually sitting with like either the coke or the heroin guy. And they knew each other. And I walked in, I was like, oh, hey. And I knew right then and there, like
Yeah.
they were like, you deal with that guy? What do you do with that guy? Well, he owes me money. And the guy would be like, well, he owes me money. And then somehow the other guy got involved, and all three of them found
Oh
out that I
no.
was basically getting from one. And I was paying them at the time, but I was just playing the shell game with it. And then they all cut me off, and they were just like, yeah, dude, we can't do this anymore with you. And then I probably got about $40,000 in debt to
Oh
the
my, to
cartel.
my.
And I just kept telling him, like, I can't do anything unless you give me money. And the one guy's like, Jeff, you owe us a lot of money, and you weren't being honest, and you were getting drugs fronted from him. You would sell them and not pay him, and then you'd pay me. Then you'd get more drugs fronted from me, and you'd pay that guy. And it's like, he's like, you can't do that way. And this one guy that was my main connect to the cartel, he would always tell me, he's like, Jeff, you don't owe me money. He's like, you owe them money. I'm like, come on, dude. Like, he was always nice to me. And then one night, I was at Yale near the one way at this dude Todd's house. And, the one way dead ends in that old Circle K that's a Tri-H now. And on the south side of it, it's really dark. And he said, hey, Jeff, I need to talk to you. Can you come meet me? And by this time, I was like just couch surfing and just a desperado. And I used to carry this gun, and I left the gun on Todd's table. And I went over there, and there was this truck parked on the side. And my dealer friend was there. He's like, Jeff, he's like, you owe us a lot of money. And I'm like, no, don't worry, dude. I'll get it. I was, kind of upbeat. And this dude got out of the truck, and it was like out of a fucking movie, probably like, 6'6", 6'8", about 250 pounds, like ostrich skin boots, pleated pants, ostrich skin belt, Western shirt, Mexican, like the hat and the smile with the gold tooth. And that dude came to the back of the truck and put his hand on me and pulled out this big fucking knife. And he's like, get the fuck in the truck, and with a heavy Mexican accent. And I just happened to like spin away, and I ran out in the middle of the parking lot, and I was like, hey, hey, hey. So people would look, and because they were parked over there in the dark. And I was like, what the fuck, dude? And I told the guy that I'd been dealing with, like, come here, let me talk to you. And he's just like, Jeff, you don't understand.
You
You
are
don't owe me money. You owe them money, and they want their fucking money. And by this time, I'd already had one friend who ripped off a cartel member for about 200 pounds of weed, and they took him and held him for 2 days and beat the shit out of him. I think they did more than that, but that was what was stuck in my head. And he's like, you got to pay this money. And I said, dude, I'll get some money. I'll get some money. And I think I went and hustled and sold and ripped off and scammed. I think I came up with like 18 or $20,000 and gave it to him. And I said, this is all I got right now. And he's like, you got to come up with the rest of the money, Jeff. He's like, it's out of my hands now. These guys are going to be looking for you. And so at that point, I was like, holy shit, this is a fucking big problem. So I actually ran to treatment in Roswell, thinking
God.
like, I got to get out of Albuquerque for a minute, right? And I don't know where to go. I can't go to my family and be like, yeah, the cartel's fucking hunting me to like fucking either kidnap me or fucking kill me. By this time, there was also another guy that I knew who actually turned me on to the Cocaine Connect. And his name was, and he got in big fucking trouble. And I heard that like he got so much cocaine fronted to him, and he did so much and got so far in debt that they, came and kidnapped him and took him to Mexico and killed him. And so all this is in my head, right? Like he owed them like probably $100,000. And that's all I was thinking. So I'm like, I gotta regroup. I can't let anybody know about my family. So I just went down there and ran to treatment and came back. And
Where'd,
luckily I
where'd
never
you get
saw,
where'd you get that idea, Roswell?
it was the only one that could take me right away.
Just
And I
started
had a
fall.
friend that I did crime with that he got in trouble and he was supposed to go to treatment. And he went there and I talked to him about it. I'm like, dude, how do you get in there? He's like, just call him and talk to this person. And I called him and my dad bought me a one-way ticket down there. And so I went down there for 30 days and I got out and, still continued to use, but I never ran across those guys again, which is pretty lucky for me.
Still to this day.
Yeah, yeah. I saw some other dealers that I knew because I had a couple dealers, heroin dealers and coke dealers that were totally separate from those guys. And I've seen them when I first got clean because you're brand new and it's Albuquerque and you start to recognize, your surroundings a lot more. But yeah, man, I just that was a very weird time.
Where was
That was right before I went to prison.
Wow. So it didn't get better after that.
No, no,
Still continued to get worse.
at that time I just became a street level user and then a fucking thief. So over time I was, on New Mexico's most wanted, Albuquerque's most wanted with this group of friends that I was running with, Darren included, and we would do smash and grabs at computer stores. And you have to remember this was, when the towers and stuff with like the 486 computer were like they were worth a lot of money. You steal RAM out of them and we would go and just fucking demolish these stores and crush these businesses and break in and take their shit. And then pretty soon we got so hot that we had to stop doing it. They created a task force to try and find us. And I think they knew who we were, but they couldn't put it all together at that time with enough to get me anyway. They'd arrested Darren a couple times and they arrested this kid Zayak a couple times. So I was kind of an outlier. And then I just started doing my own thing. And then something that some of my friends gave me shit about, I had to find something else. Like I had a bad habit then. So I started robbing golf courses and not for money, not like armed robberies, but my mom's husband at the time, the current flavor of the month, was this guy who was just this fucking degenerate, fucking codependent, fucking alcoholic, but he was this golf fanatic. And I remember that's all he'd do was just get drunk and play golf and come home and fucking be verbally abusive to my mom. But one day I was at their house and there was this specific type of golf club when it came out. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I wasn't. It was called the Big Bertha. And it was the big oversized drivers and they were fucking just expensive. And I remember I was at the house one day and he was saying something and he said something about that. Yeah, I'm going to get one of those. I'm like, well, how much do those cost? And he rattled off, I don't know, 600-700 bucks. And just instinctively, I said, oh, I can get those all day for 400. And he was like, you get me those for 400. I'm like, yeah, I'll get those for 400. He's like, if you get those, I can sell those. And so I started stealing golf clubs and I created this little entrepreneurial thievery operation to where I would go to all the golf courses. And back then guys would pull up, leave their trunk open or leave their car open or set their golf bags down and they would go get their cart and then they would drive out to the parking lot and get their clubs. So the guys that did that, I would be in a stolen car, I would grab their clubs and take off. At places when it started becoming a little more evident that something was going on, like I did that with every golf course in town, Madeira, all the public courses, they didn't have Sandia at the time or anything like that. Then I would try and, when I couldn't get them out of the parking lot, I would try and put on a polo and look as normal as possible. And by this time, I'm so emaciated and skinny and just tore the fuck up that I would go into right before the pro shop. They would set all their golf clubs down and go in to register to do their tee times or maybe go have a drink after they do. And I would just walk out with golf clubs. And I was, making thousands of dollars on this. I had a guy in town that was starting a golf shop and I won't name him because he's still around, but he had to know I would sell him all these stolen clubs and he would give me money. And I did the one thing I never said I'd do. And there was a girl I used to use with, and she came into the Roswell rehab right as I was finishing up. And
Oh no.
she got out and she called me one day. She had already started using and she was dope sick. And at this time I was living at my dad's and he was trying to figure out ways to keep me locked in the house and fix me. And she showed up and I was like, I can get us some money. And I said, take me to the Albuquerque Country Club. And I went there and I told her, I said, just back into a parking lot. I don't want the license plate out. When I come out, just drive off normally. And she didn't. She pulled in. But when I saw her, I had taken this like super expensive set of golf clubs and somebody had witnessed me walking out with them and got her license plate number. And so I called my golf club fence and I told them, hey, I got this really rad set of clubs. You're going to like these. It was probably like the golf bag and everything. It's like $3,000 worth of golf clubs. But what I didn't know is she had gone through the golf bag and the guy's ID was in there, his watch, his wallet, and she had taken all that stuff. And so I went and sold the golf clubs and she had went and started using the credit cards and running up all this debt. And so when I was hanging out with her one night, the cops surrounded her house. They had traced the car there and I was with her and I saw the cops and I was like, I got to get out of here. I got warrants. And by the time I tried to run out, they had surrounded the house and I had barricaded myself in her garage bathroom. And long story short, they extricated me from there and they pulled her out. And I got to listen to her through a vent tell the cops, I didn't do anything wrong. And it was Jeff. He was going to kill me. He runs around with these crazy people that threaten my life. And none of it was true. Like, yeah, I was crazy, but I never threatened to kill her. She was basically just trying to absolve herself of any culpability or any guilt. And I was just like, God, you bitch, you're fucking ratting on me. And so that began like a long period of law enforcement involvement where probation and violation and incarceration. And then you get out and it's, violation and then to prison and then you get out. And then, so that was really a point in time where I felt like, the criminal activity had kind of run its course. I was well known to law enforcement and, just a mess. And I could not fucking, that rule they tell you, like when you realize you've dug yourself into a hole, the first rule is to stop fucking digging. I could not stop digging
It
because I
sounds
thought
like you just kept digging.
I just kept digging because I kept thinking eventually I'm gonna fucking hit the fucking treasure chest.
You're a very determined man.
Very stubborn and very determined and very much of the ideology that like I got this. I can figure this out. And the sad part is, a lot of times using the same tool that got me into trouble, thinking that it'll get me out, which was my thinking. And it was faulty to say the least.
How long through this process were you still just trying to prove to life that you could be tougher? And
Probably
how long
just
till you wanted to get out?
Man, this was running up into like, let's see, that happened, I think, in 98,
Well, we've
99.
made it 10 years out of high school now. How
Yeah, this
many?
was a heavy decade. And so right up into that like 98 to 2000 mark, like it
Mhm.
was like I was stacking charges and getting arrested more and in and out of treatment and lying and on the run and just like just running amok. And I was pretty much of the belief that like this is my life, this is who I am, this is probably how I'm gonna die. And I just need to accept it. And that's a very, very dark place to be because when you start accepting that that's who you are, you don't even start to really think of like trying to get out of it. You're just in total acceptance and total hopelessness and total like, hopefully if I die, then it's going to be quick and there's no crazy bullshit that helps me suffer. And by this time, anybody that knew me like as a friend had totally separated. Darren we had done a crime together and, he took the fall for that. He didn't, implicate me at all. He had been shipped off to Denver, so he was gone. JB was dead at this point. Zayak was dead at this point. Mike Austin was dead at this point. Like the people that I was running with and doing stuff with were all dying off or going away. The people that weren't wanted absolutely nothing to do with me, and rightfully so, because I was a fucking walking felony and probably doing things that would get people killed. And everybody just kind of gave me a wide breath and just was like, yeah, you know, he could be a good guy, but you definitely don't want to be hanging around with him right now. Emaciated, like I'm 6'4" right now, walking around at about, I don't know, 212. And back then I was probably down to like 183, 180. So I looked bad. I was probably the person.
What are the drugs of choice at this point? Have we just narrowed it down to one
At this
or just
point, heavy,
anything?
heavy, heavy heroin. I still like coke, but when I found heroin, it obviously became so physically, overwhelming for me, and I became so dependent on it that that had to be my primary focus, is not getting sick. But when I had money or I came on a good score or something like that, my favorite thing to do was smoke crack, shoot heroin, and shoot cocaine. So that was heroin was the drug of choice. But what I really love to do is take a few big hits of crack, shoot up a really big speedball, and then right when my heart felt like it was going to fucking pound out of my chest, do a big shot of heroin and bring it all back down. And like that's probably the last
Damn.
2 years. That's what I did like on a regular basis. That was really what I liked doing.
You lasted 2 years like that?
Yeah, before that it was all just like heroin and cocaine, primarily just shooting heroin. But like at the end, I was just like a trash can junkie. I never really liked shooting speed. Like once I found the opiates, that was my thing. But like if there were no drugs around and I was broke and someone said, "Hey, you want to shoot some speed?" I'd do it. And I'd fucking be up for 2 or 3 days hating my fucking self, just trying to figure out how to get some heroin to come down. But yeah, whatever you got, that was my drug of choice.
I'm glad you're okay.
Yeah, we're all good. I wouldn't want anybody to go through that, but I don't think I'd have the life I have now if I didn't. So that's just the way it goes.
I just never see you like that. I see you as the man you are today. Even when we were young, I was like, that Jeff, he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing.
He's pretty dumb for a smart guy.
I'm glad you're okay. We'll be back in
Yeah.
a few minutes.